The sun was beating down on the stadium with a relentless heavy heat that made the very air feel like it was boiling. I stood there, shifting my weight from one foot to the other, holding a massive bouquet of white peonies that cost me $500 because I knew they were Maya's favorite. My palms were sweating against the cool surface of a card tucked into the plastic wrap. Inside that card wasn't just a sentimental note about how proud I was. It was a cashier's check for $25,000. I had spent 3 years living in a studio apartment that smelled like damp wood and old grease, working 80-hour weeks as a junior analyst, just so I could hand her the down payment for her first adult apartment. I wanted her to start her life at the top, without the crushing weight of survival that had defined my entire 20s. I looked around at the sea of designer suits and expensive sunglasses, feeling like the only person there who knew what a grocery budget actually looked like. Then Maya took the stage. She looked radiant, her graduation gown billowing slightly in the breeze as she approached the microphone. I leaned forward, my heart swelling with a pride that felt physical. But as she began to speak, the air in my lungs turned to lead. She talked for 10 minutes about the solitary journey of academic excellence. She thanked the universe for her unwavering self-reliance and her ability to forge a path through the wilderness without a map or a hand to hold. Not once did she mention the person who had paid every cent of her tuition. Not once did she acknowledge the sister who had wire transferred money for her organic groceries, her textbooks, and her Italian leather boots while wearing the same pair of scuffed flats for 3 years. I told myself she was just nervous. I told myself that public speaking makes people forget things. When the ceremony finally ended, the crowd erupted into a chaotic swarm of hugging families and popping champagne corks. I fought my way through the mass of bodies, keeping my eyes locked on her mortarboard. I saw her. She was laughing, surrounded by our parents, who looked at her like she was a deity descended to earth. I finally got within 10 feet of her. Maya looked directly at me. There was no smile, no wave, and no recognition. Her eyes were as cold as a winter morning in a graveyard. She didn't pause. She didn't even break her stride. She turned her head back to her friends and walked right past me, her shoulder brushing against the peonies I was holding. I watched in a daze as my parents followed her toward a waiting black limousine. They didn't even look back to see if I was coming. They just climbed in, the heavy door thudding shut with a sound that felt like a gavel hitting a block. I stood there on the hot pavement, clutching those stupid flowers, feeling the $25,000 check in my pocket turn into a piece of useless paper. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking so hard I almost dropped it. I thought maybe they had just lost me in the crowd. Maybe the limo was a surprise from our parents and there wasn't enough room. I dialed Maya's number, expecting her to pick up and laugh about the chaos of the day. The call didn't even ring. It went straight to a generic recorded message. I tried again. Same result. I tried my mother's phone. It rang once and then went to voicemail. I felt a cold pit open up in my stomach, a hollow sensation that defied the sweltering heat of the afternoon. I opened my messages and tried to send a quick text, asking where they were going for dinner. The little blue bubble appeared, hung there for a second, and then turned into a red exclamation point. Not delivered. I thought it was a mistake, a tech glitch. Then I saw her Instagram story posted 30 seconds later, and I was cropped out of her entire life. Driving home from the stadium, the air conditioner in my 10-year-old sedan rattled like a dying breath, blowing nothing but lukewarm dust. Every mile felt like a slow walk through the history of my own stupidity. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror and saw a woman who looked 10 years older than her actual age. I saw the fine lines of exhaustion etched around my eyes and the way I favored the left side of my jaw because I'd spent the last year ignoring a cracked molar. I couldn't afford the crown because Maya needed a private tutor for her senior thesis. My parents had called me that night, their voices thick with that specific brand of weaponized helplessness they use so well. They told me that Maya was under so much pressure, that she was our one shot at a legacy, and that if she failed now, all my previous investments would be for nothing. They called my sacrifice an investment. They called my sister a star. And what did that make me? I was just the soil she grew in, expected to be dark, silent, and full of the nutrients she needed to bloom while I withered away in the shade. I remembered the nights I spent sitting at my kitchen table, lit only by the blue light of my laptop as I balanced 2 sets of books. By day, I was an analyst. By night, I was a freelance data entry clerk, typing until my wrists throbbed with carpal tunnel. I ate so much instant ramen that the smell of those salt packets still makes my stomach turn. I did it because I believed in the narrative. I believed that families were teams. My father had lost his job years ago and decided that instead of finding a new one, he would become Maya's manager. And my mother became her emotional support. They retired early on my paycheck, using the guilt of my stability as a leash. They told me I was the strong one, the one who didn't need praise because I was built for the grind. They used my resilience as an excuse to never offer me a drop of gratitude. I remember one specific Christmas when I couldn't afford to fly home because I just covered Maya's cultural immersion trip to Florence. I spent the holiday alone in my apartment, eating a gas station sandwich. When I called them, they were all laughing in the background, opening gifts I'd sent them. Maya didn't even come to the phone. My mom just said, "Oh, she's so tired from the flight, honey, you understand." I did understand. I understood that my role was to provide the stage, not to stand on it. I spent $60,000 a year to buy her a pedigree, thinking that once she reached the finish line, she would turn around and pull me up with her. I thought the finish line was today. I thought the blocking was a momentary lapse in judgment or a prank gone wrong. I sat in my driveway, the engine ticking as it cooled, staring at the red not delivered icons on my screen. I realized then that my parents hadn't called me to see if I made it home. They hadn't checked in once. The silence was loud, echoing with the 4 years of thankless checks I'd signed. But the betrayal wasn't just a blocked number. It was the realization that my parents were holding the phone while she did it. I didn't go home. I couldn't. The silence of my empty apartment would have felt like a tomb, and I wasn't ready to be buried yet. I knew exactly where they were. There was a high-end French restaurant downtown, a place where the tasting menu cost more than my monthly car payment, that Maya had been dropping hints about for months. I drove there in a trance, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard the cheap leather cover began to peel. When I arrived, the valet looked at my battered car with a mixture of pity and disgust, but I didn't care. I walked through the gold-rimmed glass doors, the bouquet of wilted peonies still clutched in my hand like a blunt force weapon. I saw them immediately. They were seated at a round table in the center of the room, bathed in the soft, amber glow of a crystal chandelier. There was a chilled bottle of vintage champagne in a silver bucket, and Maya was holding a glass, her head tilted back in a polished, practiced laugh. She looked like she belonged there. She looked like she had been born into this world of silk and fine crystal, rather than being paved into it by my sweat. I walked straight to the table. The laughter died instantly. My mother's face went pale, and my father suddenly became very interested in his linen napkin. Maya didn't flinch. She set her glass down with a slow, deliberate click and looked at me. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. I just stood there and asked the one question that was burning a hole in my chest. I asked her why. I asked her why she had blocked me on the day I had spent 4 years preparing for. Maya sighed, a long theatrical sound of pure boredom. She leaned back in her chair and smoothed out the fabric of her designer dress, the one I had paid for 3 weeks ago. She told me that she didn't want her new life cluttered with the reminders of her struggle. She told me that I didn't understand the optics of her new position at a top-tier consulting firm. Then she said the words that finally broke the last string of my heart. She looked me in the eye and told me that I hadn't actually helped her. She said I had merely paid my debt for being the boring sibling, the one who took up space while she was meant to shine. She told me that we were no longer in the same social class, and that my presence was an embarrassment to her brand. She said I was service staff in her life story, and that she had simply reached the end of my contract. I looked at my parents, waiting for them to explode in my defense. I waited for my father to stand up and demand she apologize. Instead, he reached out and patted my hand, his eyes pleading. He told me that Maya was just excited and that I needed to be the bigger person. My mother whispered that I shouldn't ruin Maya's big night with my sensitive feelings. They sat there, eating expensive snails paid for with the money I had sent for graduation fees, and told me that my sister's cruelty was just a byproduct of her brilliance. They were choosing the star over the workhorse even now. I realized then that they weren't just complicit, they were the architects. They had raised her to believe that I was an appliance to be used until the warranty ran out. I looked at the table of people who shared my blood and realized I was looking at a group of strangers who had spent half a decade robbing me blind. I didn't cry. The tears had dried up somewhere between the stadium and the restaurant, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I took the card with the $25,000 check out of the flowers. I didn't give it to her. I watched her eyes track the card, her greed momentarily overriding her social class persona. She reached for it, but I stepped back. I tucked it into my purse and looked at my mother. I told her that she was right, that I was the stable one, and that the stable one was finally closing the stable doors. Maya scoffed and told me to stop being dramatic, telling me to leave before the manager kicked out the trash. I walked out of that restaurant with my head held high, the smell of expensive butter and betrayal clinging to my clothes. The night air was cool, but I felt a fire starting to burn in the pit of my stomach. As I walked out, I realized I hadn't just lost a sister. I had a $240,000 realization. I sat in the driver's seat of my car, the interior lights casting a dim, sickly yellow glow over my trembling hands. The engine was off, and the silence of the parking lot was punctuated only by the distant, muffled sound of laughter echoing from the restaurant I had just fled. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but it wasn't from fear anymore. It was the adrenaline of a person who had spent years being the victim and had finally decided to become the consequence. I pulled my phone out and looked at my banking app. It was a graveyard of monthly withdrawals, a digital map of my own exploitation. Because I was the stable one, I had set everything up on my accounts to simplify Maya's life. I realized with a jolt of clarity that while she had blocked my number, she was currently using a device I paid for, on a network I funded, to post photos of a dinner she didn't invite me to. I opened my service provider's portal. There it was, Maya's iPhone 15 Pro, the one I'd bought her last Christmas because she said her old one was glitching during her internship. I looked at the line status. It was active. She was likely using it right this second to laugh about me with her friends. With 3 deliberate taps, I reported the device as stolen and deactivated the SIM card. I didn't stop there. I scrolled down to her MacBook Pro's dedicated cellular plan, the one she insisted she needed so she could study, anywhere, anytime. Deactivated. It felt like I was snipping the invisible threads that tethered her luxury to my labor. Next, I logged into the health insurance portal. I had kept her on my premium plan as a dependent because she was a student, paying an extra $400 a month so she could have access to the best doctors in the city. I clicked the button to remove a dependent, citing change in eligibility. I knew she had a dental cleaning scheduled for next Tuesday to polish that Ivy League smile. She was going to walk into that office and find out she was uninsured before she even sat in the chair. I moved on to the smaller things, the status symbols she valued so much. I found the recurring payment for her Alumni Association Elite membership, $100 a month for access to private lounges and networking events for the upper crust she now claimed to belong to. I canceled it. I canceled her premium gym membership at the club downtown. I canceled her cloud storage, knowing that years of her aesthetic photos and her precious senior thesis notes were about to be locked behind a paywall she didn't have the password for. I even canceled the subscription for the grocery delivery service she used to order organic dragon fruit and artisanal cheeses on my dime. I sat back, the blue light of my screen reflecting in my eyes. I could see the restaurant's front door from my windshield. I imagined her sitting at that table, reaching for her phone to take a selfie with her champagne glass, only to see the no-service bar appear where her ego used to be. I imagined her trying to pull up her digital wallet to pay for a celebratory round of drinks for her new social class friends, only to find the card declined and the device locked. She wanted to be a self-reliant star? Fine. Stars burn in a vacuum, and I was done providing the oxygen. I felt a cold, sharp sense of relief wash over me. For years, I had been the one worrying about the bills, the coverage, and the connections. Now that weight was hers to carry. I put my car in gear and backed out of the space, leaving the shadows of the restaurant behind. I wasn't going home to sleep. I was going home to work. The digital blackout was just the opening act. The phone in her hand went dead mid-selfie. That was just the appetizer. It was time for the main course, the spreadsheet. The light in my home office was a single harsh desk lamp that cast long, skeletal shadows against the walls. I had been sitting there for 3 hours, surrounded by stacks of paper that looked like a mountain of white snow. I had gone back to the very beginning, to the first semester of Maya's freshman year. And I was meticulously tracing every dollar that had ever left my account and entered hers. At first, it was a dull ache of numbers: the tuition payments, the rent for her safe apartment, the meal plans. But as I dug deeper into the itemized bank statements and the archived Venmo descriptions, the ache turned into a searing white-hot rage. I began to see the patterns I had been too tired and too blinded by sisterly love to notice before. I looked at the emergency Ubers I had paid for, sometimes 3 or 4 in a single weekend. Maya had told me she was taking them because the campus shuttles were unreliable, and she didn't feel safe walking to the library at night. I cross-referenced the timestamps. These weren't rides to the library. They were 2 a.m. pickups from the city's most expensive nightclub districts, dropping her off at luxury hotels and private residences miles away from her dorm. I had been paying for her party lifestyle under the guise of her physical safety. Then there were the study retreats. Every spring, Maya would call me in a panic, claiming her honors seminar required a mandatory weekend at a mountain resort or a coastal conference center to focus on deep research. I had squeezed my budget until it bled to send her those $500 every March. I pulled up her old, archived social media posts from those dates, the ones she'd forgotten to hide from me back then. There were no books. There was no research. There were only photos of her in designer bikinis, sipping cocktails on a yacht, surrounded by people who looked like they had never worked a day in their lives. She had used my sweat to buy her way into their circle. The most disgusting discovery, however, came when I looked at the lab fees. For 4 years, Maya had sent me screenshots of invoices from the university for specialized equipment, high-end software licenses, and laboratory materials. They were always for odd amounts: $842.15 here, $1,200.50 there. I had paid them without question because I didn't want her to fall behind. But as I looked at the scanned PDF she had sent me 2 years ago, I noticed a slight blur around the university logo. I zoomed in until the pixels broke apart. She had forged them. She had used a basic editing program to overlay the school's header onto receipts from high-end boutiques and luxury department stores. While I was wearing shoes with holes in the soles, she was using lab fees to build a wardrobe of European silk and Italian leather. I felt like an archaeologist uncovering the ruins of my own life. I had been so proud of her academic expenses, bragging to my coworkers about how smart my sister was and how demanding her curriculum must be. In reality, I was just a private equity fund for a con artist who shared my DNA. I felt a sense of profound nausea as I added up the miscellaneous category. It wasn't just a few $100s of waste. It was a systematic, calculated extraction of wealth. She hadn't been a student. She had been a parasite with a very sophisticated filing system. But the final blow didn't come from the clothes or the clubs. It came from a series of monthly transfers I had overlooked for years. Every time I sent her rent money, she would claim the landlord had raised the utility fee or the building insurance. I would send the extra $50 or $100 feeling bad for her. I started tracking those overages. They didn't go to a landlord. They went to a third-party fintech app, a digital wallet I didn't recognize. I stayed up until the sun began to bleed through the blinds, tracing the digital breadcrumbs through layers of accounts she thought I'd never find. I found a $12,000 discrepancy. She hadn't just been taking my money. She'd been laundering it into a secret savings account for her new life away from me. I didn't sleep that night. The caffeine in my system had long since stopped being a stimulant and had become a structural part of my nervous system. My eyes were burning, but my mind was a cold, calculating machine. I opened a professional invoicing template on my laptop, the kind used by high-end consulting firms, the very world Maya so desperately wanted to inhabit. I titled it Formal and Final Statement of Unresolved Educational and Living Expenses. I started from the first wire transfer in August 4 years ago. I didn't just list the big numbers. I listed everything. I listed the $14.99 for the graphing calculator she said she lost, the $200 for the emergency dental work that turned out to be professional teeth whitening, and the $4,000 for the academic internship in London that was actually a 6-day shopping spree with her sorority sisters. I applied a standard 5% annual interest rate, the kind a bank would charge for a personal loan. I wasn't being cruel, I was being a professional. As the spreadsheet calculated the totals, the number at the bottom of the screen made my breath hitch. $284,500.62. That was the price of my sister's Ivy League soul. That was the cost of my wasted decade. To make the impact hit home, I created a second page titled Opportunity Cost Analysis. This was the section that hurt me the most to type. I used real market data to show what that money would have become if I had invested it in a simple index fund. I showed the down payment on a 4-bedroom house in a quiet suburb. I showed the retirement account that would have allowed me to stop working 2 jobs. I even included a line for a 911 Carrera, just to show her the level of luxury I had sacrificed so she could play act as an aristocrat. The contrast was staggering. On one side of the ledger there was a life of security, comfort, and a sports car. On the other side, under the heading Actualized Return on Investment, I typed 3 words. 1 block number. I attached every forged lab fee invoice I had discovered in Phase 1. I attached the screenshots of her Instagram posts from the study retreats, alongside the bank statements showing me paying for her hotels. I wanted the evidence to be undeniable. I wanted it to be a forensic reconstruction of a 4-year heist. I didn't just send it to Maya. I knew her well enough to know she would just delete it and call me crazy. I added my parents to the recipient list. They needed to see exactly how much of my life they had helped their star daughter consume. Then I took the most important step. I added our family's estate lawyer, Mr. Henderson, to the CC line. He was a dry, meticulous man who had handled our grandfather's will, and had always treated me with a shred of respect that my parents lacked. By including him, I wasn't just venting. I was creating a legal record. I was served notice that this was no longer a family matter. It was a debt. I sat there with my finger hovering over the mouse, the blue light of the screen making my skin look ghostly. I thought about the girl Maya used to be, the one who cried when she skinned her knee and ran to me for a bandage. I realized that girl was gone, or maybe she never existed. Maybe she was just a character she played until she found a better script. I felt a strange sense of mourning, not for her, but for the person I could have been if I hadn't spent my youth as a human ATM. I wasn't the stable one. I was the exploited one. And the stable was officially empty. I hit send. The whoosh sound of the outgoing email felt like a guillotine blade dropping. It was a clean, sharp severance. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, my hands finally still. I expected silence. I expected her to wait until morning to formulate a plan with our parents, to find a way to spin this as me being unstable or jealous. I thought I had hours of peace ahead of me. I thought the digital blackout I had initiated earlier would keep her at bay until she could find a Wi-Fi signal to beg for. I was wrong. Maya was always resourceful when her status was threatened. She must have been using our parents' phones or a hotel landline, or perhaps she had frantically bought a prepaid burner the moment her service cut out. I hadn't even finished my glass of water when the vibration started. My phone, which had been a silent weight in my pocket all day, began to dance across the granite countertop. The screen stayed dark, showing no name, no photo, just the words that every victim of a toxic family knows by heart. The email was sent at 2 a.m. By 2:05 a.m., my blocked phone started screaming with no caller ID pings. The banging on my front door started at 6 in the morning. It wasn't a knock. It was the sound of someone who believed they owned the wood they were trying to splinter. I didn't even have to look through the peephole to know who it was. The shrill, rhythmic screeching of my mother's voice was already bleeding through the frame. When I opened the door, I didn't see parents who were worried about a fractured family. I saw 2 people in a state of pure, frantic panic, because their golden ticket had just been hit with a reality check. My father didn't even say hello. He pushed his way into the entryway, waving a printed copy of my invoice in the air like it was a declaration of war. He screamed that I was a traitor, that I was trying to sabotage Maya's future before it even started. My mother stood behind him, her face twisted into a mask of pure indignation. She told me that Maya had just landed a junior associate position at a prestigious global consulting firm, and that my stunt with the lawyer could trigger a red flag on her background check. They weren't angry that Maya had betrayed me. They were terrified that her betrayal wouldn't be profitable anymore. I stood there, leaning against the wall with my arms crossed, feeling a strange, detached coldness. I asked them plainly if they knew she was going to block me. My mother didn't even have the decency to lie. She snapped at me, saying that Maya needed a clean break from the burden of her childhood, and that I should have known she would eventually outgrow my level of lifestyle. They admitted, right there in my hallway, that they had sat in the limo and watched her block my number, nodding in agreement that it was time for her to move into her new circle, without her bitter older sister dragging her down. They saw my 4 years of labor as a service fee that had simply expired. The volume escalated until the walls seemed to vibrate. My father started making threats, telling me he'd tell everyone in our hometown that I was a thief and a liar if I didn't retract the email to the lawyer. That's when the heavy shadow appeared on my porch. My neighbor Miller is a retired police sergeant who doesn't like noise, and he likes bullies even less. He stepped into the doorway, his massive frame blocking the morning light. He didn't say a word at first. He just held up his phone, the red recording light glowing like a warning beacon. He calmly informed my parents that they were currently on private property, making documented threats of extortion and harassment. The shift in the room was instantaneous. My father's bravado evaporated. He knew Miller, and he knew Miller wasn't a family friend who would keep secrets. Miller told them they had 60 seconds to walk to their car before he called the precinct to have them trespassed. He stood there like a stone wall, a third-party witness to the toxicity I had lived with for decades. It was the first time in my life someone had stood between me and their entitlement. My parents backed away, but my mother couldn't help herself. As she reached the sidewalk, she turned back, her voice cracking with a venom I'll never forget. She screamed that I was nothing but a bank to them, a tool that had outlived its usefulness, and that I was dead to the family for asking to be paid back for love. I watched them drive away, their taillights disappearing around the corner. I felt a weight lift, but it wasn't the weight of the debt, it was the weight of the relationship. If I was just a bank, then it was time to stop acting like a sister and start acting like a creditor. Banks don't care about big nights or new circles. Banks care about their principal and their interest. My mom screamed that I was nothing but a bank. So I decided to act like a bank and start the foreclosure. I spent the next morning in a glass-walled office that overlooked the city, sitting across from a man named Marcus Thorne. He wasn't the family's estate lawyer. He was a specialist in predatory debt and contract litigation. I had brought 3 thick binders filled with every digital interaction I'd had with Maya over the last 4 years. My parents always assumed I was the stable one because I was boring, but the truth was I was stable because I was meticulous. Every time Maya had asked for money, I had made sure the paper trail was clear. I showed Marcus a text from her sophomore year where she wrote, "Please just loan me the $4,000 for the housing deposit. I'll pay you back once I'm settled in my career." I showed him the emails where I explicitly stated, "This is an advance on your future earnings, not a gift," and her typed responses of, "I know, I'm so grateful, you're my lifesaver." Marcus flipped through the pages with a neutral expression that slowly sharpened into a predatory grin. He explained that in the eyes of the law, the intent of the parties at the time of the transfer is what defines a gift versus a loan. Maya had spent 4 years creating a written record of indebtedness. She had been so focused on the short-term goal of getting the cash that she had signed her own financial death warrant in blue iMessage bubbles. Marcus looked at the forged lab fee invoices I had uncovered and shook his head. He told me that this wasn't just a civil matter of unpaid loans. This was active fraud. By misrepresenting university expenses to solicit funds, she had crossed a line that turned a family dispute into a potential criminal complaint. He didn't suggest we sue my parents. He suggested we go straight for the jugular. We drafted a formal demand for payment, a document that vibrated with legal authority. It didn't just ask for the money back. It laid out the forensic evidence of her fraud and the itemized list of her broken promises. But the masterstroke wasn't the letter itself. It was where we sent it. Marcus knew the firm Maya had bragged about joining. It was a global powerhouse that handled billion-dollar accounts, the kind of place that treats its reputation like a religion. They didn't just hire stars. They hired people with impeccable integrity. We sent the demand letter via a specialized courier directly to the firm's general counsel and her prospective department head. We weren't just asking for my $284,500.62. We were providing them with a courtesy disclosure regarding the character of their newest associate. We included the evidence of the forged university documents she had used to swindle her own sister. Marcus explained that most high-level employment contracts in that tier of the corporate world have very specific language regarding the behavior of their employees, even outside of the office. They couldn't afford to have a documented fraudster on their payroll. especially one whose first act of independence was to default on a $250,000 family debt. I felt a cold surge of vindication as I watched Marcus sign his name to the cover letter. I wasn't just chasing a check anymore. I was dismantling the pedestal my parents had built for her. The firm she worked for had a moral turpitude clause in their contract, and I was about to show them exactly who they hired. The silence that followed the delivery of those legal documents was the loudest thing I had ever heard. For 48 hours the world was still. Then the collapse happened all at once, like a skyscraper with a hollow foundation finally meeting a gust of wind. I received a short clipped email from Marcus Thorne. He had been contacted by the HR director at the firm. They didn't even wait to start an internal investigation. In the high-stakes world of global consulting, a credible accusation of financial forgery is a terminal diagnosis. They had rescinded Maya's offer effective immediately. They didn't want the liability. They didn't want the drama. They simply moved on to the next Ivy League graduate who didn't come with $250,000 of baggage and a paper trail of fraud. The shockwaves hit my parents next. They had spent years telling everyone at the country club that Maya was their retirement plan, bragging about the six-figure starting salary that was supposed to keep them in the lifestyle they felt they deserved. They had even taken out a high-interest bridge loan to cover the deposit on a luxury condo near Maya's new office, fully expecting her to take over the payments the moment her first bonus hit. Without that job, the loan became a noose. The house of cards they had built using my life as the table was folding. Then came the phone call. I was sitting on my porch watching the sunset when my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. I knew instinctively it was her. I answered without saying a word. The sound on the other end was a ragged, ugly sobbing. It wasn't the polished, delicate crying she used when she wanted a new handbag. It was the sound of a person who had realized the exit doors were locked and the building was on fire. Maya was hysterical. She kept gasping for air, telling me that the firm had treated her like a criminal. She said they had escorted her out of her orientation session in front of everyone. She begged me to call Marcus and tell him it was all a big misunderstanding. She actually had the nerve to say that we were family, and that I was destroying her life over a little bit of money. I listened to her for a full 3 minutes. I listened to her talk about how hard she had worked for that degree, how much the prestige meant to her, and how our parents were going to lose everything if I didn't fix this. She never once said she was sorry for blocking me. She never once acknowledged the years I spent eating salt and grease so she could eat truffles. Even in her total defeat, her only concern was the optics of her failure. She was still trying to use me to solve a problem she had created with her own arrogance. She spoke to me as if I were a malfunctioning tool that just needed a little bit of grease to start working again. When she finally paused to catch her breath, waiting for me to comfort her, waiting for the stable sister to cave in and save the day, I felt absolutely nothing. The saint in me had died on the pavement outside that stadium, and the bank had no interest in subprime borrowers. I remembered her telling me to leave the restaurant before the manager kicked out the trash. I remembered the cold look in her eyes when she walked past my bouquet. "I don't think you understand," I said, my voice as flat and emotionless as a dial tone. "I'm not your sister anymore. I'm your largest creditor. And since you're currently unemployed, I suggest you start looking for a way to liquidate your assets." She started to scream then, a high-pitched, vibrating sound of pure entitlement. She called me a monster. She called me a failure. She told me that I would always be the boring one, and that no amount of money would ever make me as special as she was. She told me I was dead to her and that I would die alone. I didn't wait for her to finish. I didn't need to hear the end of a script I had already rewritten. I took a deep breath of the cool evening air and spoke 4 words into the receiver. "New phone, who's this?" I hung up and blocked the new number before the screen could even dim. I felt a surge of energy, a lightness in my chest that had been missing since I was 18 years old. She tried to play the sister card one last time, but I had one more receipt she didn't know I had. I didn't want to spend the next 10 years of my life in a courtroom staring at the people who had drained me dry. I knew that chasing the full amount personally would mean staying tethered to their chaos, and my peace was worth more than the remaining balance. So, I did the one thing that would ensure Maya felt my presence every single day without me ever having to speak her name again. I bundled the entire debt, the interest, and the documented evidence of fraud, and I sold it to a high-aggression third-party collection agency. I only got a fraction of the total value in cash, but that wasn't the point. The point was that I transferred the account to people who don't care about family ties or Ivy League feelings. Now, instead of a sister she can ignore, she has a rotation of debt collectors who will follow her credit score like a shadow for the next decade. Every time she tries to rent an apartment, apply for a credit card, or sign a new employment contract, my name will be there in the fine print of her failure. With the payout from the debt sale and the $25,000 check I never gave her, I finally did something for myself. I bought a modest, sun-drenched condo 2 towns over. It's small, but every square inch belongs to me. There is no room for a star to crash on the couch, and there are no extra bedrooms for parents who view me as a retirement fund. I changed my number, deleted my old social media, and went completely dark. For the first time in my adult life, I wake up and my money is still in my bank account. The molar that I ignored for a year has been fixed. I wear shoes that don't let the rain in. I realize that the greatest lie I was ever told was that family is a blank check. It isn't. Investment is for the stock market, not for people who see you as an ATM. I'm finally living for me. But wait until you hear what happened when my parents tried to sue me for elderly abandonment. After realizing Maya couldn't pay their mortgage,